Two Blackhawks don't land on a suburban highway at rush hour unless someone powerful is missing. So why were they screaming one question into the rain? Where's the nurse? Megan Hart had just been fired, badge stripped, hands still smelling like antiseptic and blood. She was walking home in soaked scrubs, clutching a box of 10 years' worth of small things, trying not to calculate rent in her head. Cars blasted past, spraying cold water up her legs. The sky felt low-heavy final. Then the rotors came. The asphalt trembled. Strangers raised phones. Soldiers poured out, not hunting a criminal, but searching the shoulder of the road like it was a battlefield. If you've ever done the right thing and paid for it, stay with me. Like this video comment where you're watching from, and let's find out why the military needed her alive. A few hours earlier, Megan Hart was still inside those walls, still moving the way she always moved when the night tried to swallow the hospital whole. The emergency department at Sandhills Regional had a particular sound at 2 in the morning. Not quiet, not loud, but loaded. Monitors chirped in clipped rhythms. The pneumatic doors sighed open and shut. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried with a thin, exhausted wail that never quite rose into a full scream. The fluorescent lights did their usual stutter, a faint flicker that made everything look one shade colder than it should have been. Megan stood at the nurse's station, palms resting on the edge of the counter, reading a screen that refused to make sense. One patient's potassium was too high. Another's blood pressure was too low. A third was calling out for water, the kind of call that wasn't rude, just frightened. Her pen was tucked behind her ear, her hair yanked into a bun that had loosened hours ago. The fabric of her scrubs felt stiff with sweat and sanitizer. She had not sat down once since midnight. Across the station, a young resident hovered like he was afraid the air might break if he moved too fast. "You good, Megan?" he asked. She didn't look up. She clicked through lab results, then looked down at the paper bracelet in her hand. The name was spelled wrong. It always was. "I'm good," she said, voice even. "You're the one who looks like you're about to faint." He gave a thin smile, relieved she'd noticed. "First month. I keep thinking I'm going to miss something." "You will," Megan said, and finally met his eyes. "Then you'll learn. Keep your ears open, keep your hands clean, ask questions. And if something feels wrong, it probably is." Before he could answer, the radio crackled with the charge nurse's voice. A stretcher was rolling in hot. The ambulance bay doors flew open with a gust of wet air. Two paramedics pushed in a gurney at a speed that cut through the entire department like a blade. The patient on it was drenched in sweatshirt plastered to his chest. His head rolled against the pillow as if he was trying to find a place that didn't hurt. His boots, heavy and mud-caked, hung off the end of the gurney like they belonged to a different world than the polished linoleum under them. "We found him behind a laundromat," one paramedic shouted as they moved. "Alley off Bragg Boulevard. No wallet, no phone, no ID. Fever's through the roof. He's been talking, but it's all gibberish." Megan fell into stride beside the gurney. Her fingers landed on the patient's wrist without thinking. Skin slick, pulse rapid, too fast, too thin. She glanced at the monitor the paramedic had clipped to the rail. Heart rate, 148. Oxygen, not great. Temperature, 104. "What's his pressure?" Megan asked. Dropping, the paramedic said, 90/50 on arrival now, 86/48. Megan's mind tightened into a narrow corridor. "Room 4, she said. "Trauma bay. Move." They rushed him in. The trauma bay was a rectangle of harsh light and hard edges. A supply cabinet, a crash cart, a metal sink stained with iodine. The bed in the center waited like a question. Megan took control without raising her voice. 2 large-bore IV's blood cultures. Lactate, CBCCMP. Fluids wide open, put him on oxygen. The resident stepped in, hands trembling just enough to notice. "Should we call for surgery?" "Not yet," Megan said, eyes sweeping the man's body. Sweat beaded on his forehead and gathered at his jawline. His arms were roped with muscle, but the muscle looked used, not gym-built. There were old scars on his forearms, thin white lines that didn't come from accidents in a kitchen. On his shoulder, beneath a smear of grime, a jagged pattern that looked like shrapnel scars. The man's lips moved. His eyes stayed shut. He wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to something he couldn't see. Echo 2, he rasped. Grid, grid. The resident leaned closer. Sir, can you tell me your name? The man's mouth opened, and a string of numbers came out broken by a cough that sounded wet and wrong. Then his body jerked a sudden spasm that pulled a groan from deep in his chest. Megan's gaze snapped down to his right side. A bandage, dirty around the edges, pressed against his ribs. The edges of the gauze were stuck to his skin like it had been there too long. Cut that, Megan said. The resident hesitated. What if it's a gunshot? Then we'll see it, Megan answered. Cut it. The resident's hands moved. Scissors slid under tape. The bandage peeled away with a soft, ugly sound. Underneath was a wound that made Megan's stomach drop. It wasn't a tear. It wasn't a jagged hole. It was a clean incision, straight as if it had been drawn closed once with careful hands, and then reopened by infection that had crawled under the skin like fire. The edges were red and swollen. Pus pooled in a pocket near the suture line. The skin around it was hot enough that Megan could feel it before her fingers even touched it. This isn't street, she murmured. The resident swallowed. Could be from surgery. Not from a hospital surgery, Megan said, and her eyes narrowed. She had seen infections. She had seen abscesses that came from dirty needles and bad luck. This was different. This was precise and furious, the kind of thing that happened when a wound was made clean in a place that wasn't clean at all. Megan flushed the area, cleaned what she could. She watched the man's face as she worked. Even unconscious, his brow pulled tight like his body wanted to fight pain, even when his mind couldn't. The door swung open, and the temperature in the room changed. Dr. Clayton Pierce stepped inside like he owned the light. He was the new chief of surgery, the kind of man whose hair never fell out of place, whose coat never wrinkled, whose shoes never touched a puddle. His cologne arrived before he did sharp and expensive cutting through antiseptic like a challenge. He looked from the patient's boots to the muddy smear on the floor, then to Megan's gloved hands. He did not look at the man's face. What is this? Pierce asked, voice clipped. Megan kept flushing the wound. John Doe. Found in an alley. Septic. Hypotensive. Pierce stepped closer, tablet in his hand. He flicked through the chart with a finger that looked like it never did manual work. No insurance listed, no identification, no admitting information. Why is he in my trauma bay? Megan's eyes stayed on the wound. Because he's dying. Pierce let out a short laugh that held no humor. That is not a diagnosis, Nurse Hart. That is an opinion. Megan's jaw tightened. His temperature is 104. His pressure is crashing. His heart rate is 150. His wound is infected. He's in septic shock. Pierce's gaze slid over the incision for the first time, and even then he treated it like a stain on a tablecloth. And you decided on your own to allocate resources. Antibiotics, a trauma bed, labs. I didn't decide it on my own, Megan said. This is the ER. This is what we do. Pierce's eyes sharpened. We stabilize. We triage. We do not become a shelter for every unidentified body that rolls in without a payer source. The resident shifted uncertain. A paramedic glanced at Megan as if waiting for her to back down. Megan didn't. She kept her voice level. If we move him right now, he arrests. Pierce's smile tightened at the corners. Then move him later. Megan looked up finally and met Pierce's eyes head-on. You're asking me to discharge a septic patient. Pierce leaned in. His voice dropped, not loud, but sharp enough to cut. I'm telling you to clear this bed. Transfer him to county. They can handle charity cases. Megan's hands paused. The flush syringe hovered above the wound. County is 40 minutes away. Then they should drive fast, Pierce said. The resident cleared his throat. Dr. Pierce, if he's septic transfer could be risky. We could start broad spectrum and reassess. Pierce's head turned like a gun turret. And who are you? The resident's face reddened. Dr. Samuels, first year. Pierce didn't even nod. Dr. Samuels, you will learn quickly that risk is not something this hospital absorbs for free. If he doesn't have coverage, he is a liability. A bed is a bed. A nurse is a nurse. Stay in your lane. The words hung in the air, heavy and humiliating. Megan felt heat crawl up her neck, not from embarrassment but from anger. She'd learned to compress into something useful. She had listened to men like Pierce for years. She had watched them talk about patients like numbers and then go home to sleep while nurses stayed to hold hands through the worst moments of someone else's life. She swallowed once. He's not a liability, she said. He's a person. Pierce's eyes hardened. You have 15 minutes. When I come back, he will be out of my trauma bay. Megan stared at him. If you come back and he's gone, it'll be because he died. Pierce's mouth twitched as if he was amused. Then you'll have saved us a transfer. He turned and walked out, coat flaring behind him like a curtain closing. For a moment, the room went quiet, except for the monitor's relentless beep and the hiss of oxygen. The paramedic muttered, Jesus. The resident looked at Megan wide-eyed. What do we do? Megan returned to the wound. Her hands moved again, steady. We do our job. She ordered fluids. She got blood cultures. She watched the pressure fight its way upward and then slip back down. She pushed acetaminophen. She started the standard antibiotics, but her stomach kept turning over the wound, over the pattern of the infection, over the way the man's delirium sounded like a radio transmission. When she leaned closer to listen, the man's lips moved again. South Ridge, he whispered. Compromise. Get the bird. Megan's chest tightened. She had grown up around Fort Liberty. She'd treated soldiers who came in with training injuries and bar fights and broken bones from weekend stupidity. She'd treated wives who came in shaking, asking if anyone had called them yet. She knew the sound of a man who had seen things he wasn't supposed to talk about. This patient sounded like he was still there. She glanced at the clock. 2:15. Pierce had said 15 minutes. He would return when it was convenient for him, when it would feel like a power move. Not immediately, not while she was staring at the patient's dropping pressure. That was the thing about men like Pierce. They loved authority, but they hated urgency. Megan leaned in, voice low. Hey, she said the way she spoke to scared patients and angry ones. Stay with me. The man's hand twitched on the sheet. Fingers flexed knuckles, whitening, then relaxed again. Sweat rolled down his temple. Megan stepped out into the hall long enough to catch the charge nurse. I need room 4 behind curtain B, she said. No questions. I'm covering it. The charge nurse, Carla, stared at her. Carla had worked with Megan for 8 years. Carla knew what a line looked like when it was about to be crossed. Megan. Carla said quietly, What did Pierce say? Megan's eyes flicked toward the hallway where Pierce's office sat like a fortress. He wants him transferred. Carla's mouth tightened. He doesn't have ID, does he? No. Carla exhaled through her nose. You're thinking about keeping him here. Megan didn't answer. Her silence was the answer. Carla looked past Megan into room 4, then back. He looks bad. He's going to die if we move him, Megan said. Carla held Megan's gaze for a long second, then nodded once. I can buy you time, but not forever. I don't need forever, Megan said. I need hours. Carla turned away, already moving. I'll shuffle assignments. I'll keep Pierce busy if he comes sniffing around. You owe me coffee for a month. Megan almost smiled. Deal. Back in room 4, she closed the curtain and made the choice that would cost her everything. She wheeled the bed into the far corner behind a heavy storage curtain that usually hid extra IV poles and broken equipment. She dimmed the overhead light just enough that it wouldn't be obvious from the hall. Then she went to the medication dispenser. The screen asked for authorization. Megan typed in her code. Denied. She stared at the denial, then typed in her supervisor override request. Another screen. Another question. Another warning about policy and audits. Megan's fingers hovered. Her heart thumped once hard. She pressed confirm. The drawer clicked open. Vancomycin sat inside like a small, expensive promise. She pulled it out, checked the label twice, and carried it back like she was holding something fragile. When she hung the bag, the IV line trembled slightly from the movement of the bed. She taped it down with careful hands. She watched the drip begin slow and steady. "I've got you," she said to the unconscious man, though she didn't know if he could hear. Hours in an ER do not pass like hours anywhere else. They come in pieces. A scream in triage, a code in room 2, a drunk man in a wheelchair trying to punch a wall, a quiet old woman holding her chest and saying she doesn't want to be a bother. Megan moved through those pieces like a swimmer cutting through rough water. She traded favors with other nurses. She covered a bathroom break. She started an IV for someone whose veins were gone from chemo. She pressed her hand on a bleeding scalp and told a teenager it was going to be okay, even though she didn't know if it was. And in between, she returned to the curtain to the hidden bed, to the man who didn't have a name. His fever fought the medication like a living thing. Sweat soaked his hair. He thrashed and muttered, eyes, clenched tight mouth, working through words that sounded like fragments of a map. Grid 7, he groaned. Echo, 2, bird, bird. Megan sponged his forehead with cool water. She kept his blankets dry. She checked his pressure every 15 minutes. She adjusted fluids. She watched the antibiotics drip into his veins as if watching them could make them work faster. "Hey," she whispered. "You're safe. You're in a hospital. My name's Megan. Stay here with me." At one point, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, strong, even through weakness, reflexive, as if he was catching something in the dark. His fingers locked around her pulse for a second, then released. Megan stared at the hand when it fell back onto the sheet. The knuckles were scarred. The nails were trimmed short. The palm was rough with callus, not from construction, from weapons. By 5:30, the fever broke, the way storms sometimes break, not gradually, but all at once. The sweat cooled, the tremors eased, his breathing steadied, his heart rate slid down from panic to exhaustion. Megan was adjusting his line when his eyes opened. They opened fully, not half-lidded and confused like most patients coming out of a fever dream. They snapped open with a sharpness that made her pause. His irises were a clear gray, the color of steel underwater. His gaze moved from the ceiling to the curtain, then to her face, and it didn't wander. It assessed. He tried to sit up. Pain hit him. He clenched his jaw. His hand gripped the sheet. "Easy," Megan said, pressing him gently back. "You're not ready." He looked at her like he was deciding whether to believe her. Then he spoke. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, low, steady, not slurred, not weak. "Sandhills Regional," Megan said. "Emergency department." "You were in septic shock." He blinked once. "How long?" "Since about 2, Megan said. It's almost 6. His gaze flicked to the IV, followed the line as if he was tracing a route. "Who's in charge?" Megan let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. "Right now, me." He studied her again. Megan felt the strange sensation of being evaluated in a way that had nothing to do with her nursing skills. Like she was a potential threat, or a tool, or a piece on a board. "You stayed," he said. "I stayed," Megan answered. His eyes shifted, and for the first time she saw something behind the steel. Confusion, maybe. Or gratitude that he didn't quite know how to express. "I need a line," he said. "Secure." Megan glanced toward the nurse's station. "We don't have secure lines." "I need a phone," he insisted, voice firm. Megan lowered her voice. "There's a landline at the station. It's not secure. It's barely alive." He stared at the ceiling for a second as if hearing something far away. Then he nodded once. "I only need one call." Megan stepped out, hurried to the station, and grabbed the dusty handset that had been replaced by cordless phones years ago, but kept around because hospitals never throw anything away. She brought it back, thread of the cord trailing behind her like a leash. She held it out. One call. He took it, fingers trembling slightly now that he was awake enough to feel what his body had been through. He pressed the receiver to his ear, listened to the dial tone, then began punching numbers with a precision that felt automatic. Megan watched his face as he listened. On the second ring, his shoulders loosened. The change was subtle, but it was there. He spoke into the receiver, voice low. "This is Reeve. I need immediate pickup. Medical. Compromised." A pause. "Yes. Location confirmed. Bring the general." Another pause, eyes closing briefly. "No, I'm not moving, not without the nurse." Megan's stomach tightened. "What did you just say?" she whispered. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "I said I'm not moving." Before she could ask anything else, the curtain ring screeched. The curtain ripped open so hard the metal rail rattled. Dr. Clayton Pierce stood there with 2 security guards behind him. His face was flushed, eyes bright with anger. It was the kind of anger that came from being disobeyed. Megan felt her spine go straight. She set her shoulders like she was stepping into a storm. Pierce pointed at the IV line as if it were evidence. "You did it," he said. "You stole medication. You hid him. You defied a direct order." Megan stepped between Pierce and the bed, blocking the patient's view of the guards. "He's conscious," she said. "He stabilized. The antibiotics worked." Pierce's mouth twisted. "I do not care. This is my department. My surgical floor. My liability. Get him out and take her badge." The guards hesitated. Megan recognized one of them, a man named Tom, who had shared her coffee at 3 a.m. during long shifts. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. "Tom." Megan said, voice quiet, not pleading, just naming the moment for what it was. Tom swallowed. "I'm sorry, Megan." Pierce leaned forward. "Now." Megan reached up and unclipped her badge. The plastic felt warmer than it should have pressed against her skin for years. She held it for a second, then handed it over without letting Pierce see her hands shake. Then she took her stethoscope from around her neck. The tubing was worn, the metal cool. Her father had given it to her the day she graduated nursing school. He had hugged her in the driveway and said she was built for hard work and harder choices. Megan set the stethoscope on the table beside the bed. The patient watched everything. His gaze moved from Megan's face to Pierce's and stayed there. It was not a friendly look. Pierce didn't notice. Pierce was too busy enjoying power. "You're done," Pierce said. "You will not step foot in this hospital again." Megan turned her head slightly toward the patient. She kept her voice calm, professional, the way she always spoke to a patient at discharge, even when she was being cut open inside. "Drink water," she said. "Don't let them move you until you feel strong enough to stand without shaking. If you start feeling cold or confused, tell someone immediately." The man's fingers tapped a slow rhythm beneath the sheet like he was counting. His eyes never left Pierce. Pierce scoffed. "Get out." Megan picked up her cardboard box from the corner, the one she had filled quickly from her locker while Tom stood behind her, pretending not to watch. A coffee mug. A framed photo of her dog. A spare pair of socks. Little pieces of a life that did not fit neatly into a box. She walked out of the trauma bay with her head high because there was no other way to walk out of a place you had given 10 years to. The automatic doors at the ER entrance slid open and cold morning air hit her like a slap. Rain fell in a steady, miserable drizzle that soaked her scrubs in seconds. She stood under the overhang for a moment, looking back through glass at the bright chaos inside, at the nurses moving at the stretchers, rolling at the world that had been hers. She thought about holidays missed, birthdays spent eating vending machine crackers between codes, the nights she went home with blood on her shoes and still came back the next day. Now she was a trespasser. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A bank balance alert. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her mind was already doing the math. Rent, car repair, groceries, bills that didn't care about ethics. She checked her pockets. Keys, phone, wallet, no umbrella. She'd left it in her locker. She turned slightly toward the doors, then stopped. Tom had said she wasn't allowed back inside. Her car was in the shop anyway, transmission failing in slow motion. She'd taken the bus to work. The bus schedule in her head surfaced like a cruel joke. Next bus did not run until 7 on Sundays. It was barely 6:15. Her apartment sat 5 miles away, the kind of distance that was easy in a car and punishing on foot, especially in wet shoes and thin scrubs. The highway shoulder was narrow in places. The traffic this early was a mix of commuters and delivery trucks, the kind that didn't always see a lone figure in rain. Megan looked at the road. Then she looked back at the hospital one last time. She did not allow herself to cry under those lights. Not where Pierce could claim he broke her. She stepped off the curb and began walking. Her clogs squeaked against wet pavement. Cars roared past, splashing dirty water onto her legs. The cardboard box grew heavier with each mile, not because the items weighed more, but because the meaning did. The photo of her dog slid in the bottom corner. The mug knocked gently against the side, a small hollow clink that sounded like an ending. Megan kept her eyes on the line where shoulder met grass. One foot in front of the other, breath in, breath out. She tried not to think about Pierce calling around telling other hospitals she was insubordinate. Telling them she stole medication. Telling them she was a liability. She tried not to think about the man in the bed, the incision, the fever, the way his eyes had opened like a switch flipping on. She tried not to think about the words she had overheard through the receiver. Bring the general, not without the nurse. Rain slid down her face and mixed with the salt of sweat that had never fully dried. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. Her fingers were raw from sanitizer and gloves. Her shoulders ached from lifting bodies from compressions from work that never appeared on a bill. The highway stretched ahead in a gray ribbon. To her right, an open field sat behind a low fence, empty now, muddy from winter rain. In summer, it hosted county fairs and fireworks, families laughing under bright lights. This morning, it was just a flat expanse of wet grass bending under the wind. Megan pulled her coat tighter, though it did nothing. The cold seeped in anyway, finding every gap. She kept walking because stopping felt worse. And somewhere above the rain, beneath the ordinary noise of engines and tires on asphalt, the air began to vibrate with a low, distant thrum that did not belong to any truck on the road. Tiếp tục viết phần 3 với 2.500 từ. Đã suy nghĩ trong 23 giây. The sound grew until it stopped being a sound and became a presence pressing against Megan's ribs like a second heartbeat. She stepped off the pavement into the wet grass, thinking of trucks of freight, of anything that belonged to the road. Then the clouds tore open. 2 helicopters dropped through the gray like they had been waiting above the weather patient and certain. Matte, black, heavy, muscular shapes, their rotors carving the rain into spirals. Not the red and white medical birds she'd watched land on hospital pads 100 times. These were built for war, the kind of machines that did not ask permission. Cars slammed brakes. Horns blared. A van fishtailed and stopped sideways. Doors flew open and people climbed out with phones, raised faces, tilted up mouths, hanging in the same stunned question. The lead helicopter hovered over the highway, low enough that Megan felt the wind whip her hair loose, low enough that the air snapped against her skin. The rotor wash yanked the cardboard box from her hands. Her coffee mug smashed on the asphalt. The framed photo of her dog flipped end over end and vanished into the grass. Megan crouched and threw an arm over her head, eyes squeezed shut against flying grit. The helicopter did not crash. It landed right in the middle of the 4 lanes as if the highway were a runway made for it. The second helicopter dropped into the field beside the road, skids biting mud grass flattening under the force. The roar held the world in place. No one moved. No one breathed right. Then the side door of the lead helicopter slid open. Men poured out fast, not stumbling, not rushing in panic. They moved like a practiced dancer. They wore gear that drank the light helmets with mounts, plate carriers, rifles slung low across their chests. Their heads turned in sharp angles as they took in the scene. 2 of them jogged toward the stalled cars waving people back with open hands. Another ran to the shoulder and planted himself between Megan and the traffic, scanning the road like he expected gunfire to come from a minivan. A bigger man broke from the group and sprinted toward Megan, boots pounding wet pavement. He stopped a few feet from her and raised both hands, palms out like a man approaching an animal that might bolt. "Ma'am," he shouted over the engines, "look at me." Megan lifted her head. Rain slid down her cheeks and into her mouth. She tasted dirt and metal. The man's beard was soaked. A scar cut through his eyebrow like a lightning strike. "Are you Nurse Megan Hart?" Her throat tightened. She managed a nod. "Yes," she said, voice thin. "Who are you? What is this?" The man tapped the headset pressed tight to his ear. "Command, we have the Angel," he said into the mic. "Repeat, we have her. Angel." The word hit Megan with a strange, bitter sting. She had been called worse things in the last hour. Insubordinate. Thief. Liability. Angel did not fit. He turned back to her. Even with the rifle across his chest, he did not look like he wanted to hurt her. He looked like he wanted to get her out of the rain before she froze. "You need to come with us," he said. Megan's back pressed against the guardrail. "I was fired," she said quickly. "I did not do anything wrong. I just gave him antibiotics. I just did my job." "I know," the man said. His voice softened for half a second, then hardened again with urgency. "Captain Mason Reeve woke up enough to make one call. He told us what happened. He refuses treatment unless you are there." Megan stared at him. The name did not register at first. It was just a name sharp and unfamiliar. Then her mind flashed back to the gray eyes, the way the man in the bed had spoken into the receiver with controlled calm. "Bring the general." Not without the nurse. Her hands began to shake. "I do not understand," she said. "You do not need to," the operator replied. "You just need to move." He offered his hand. Megan looked past him at the helicopter door, a rectangle of dark interior lit by a strip of red light. She looked at the traffic jam, the drivers standing in the rain, their faces lit by their phone screens. She looked down at the scattered remains of her cardboard box, her dog's photo lost somewhere in the grass. Her entire life felt like it had been knocked loose by the rotors. Megan took the man's hand. He pulled her up and guided her toward the helicopter. A second operator met them at the door, grabbed Megan by the elbow and lifted her inside with the ease of someone used to hauling equipment and injured bodies. The cabin smelled like oil and canvas. It was loud enough to rattle teeth. Someone draped a thick wool blanket over her shoulders, the weight instantly warm. Another hand pressed a heat pack into her palm. Megan sat on a bench seat and tried to breathe. Across from her, two operators watched the door, eyes scanning as the helicopter lifted. The floor vibrated. The world tilted. Fayetteville shrank beneath the rain and disappeared under the belly of the aircraft. The bearded operator crouched close so she could hear him. "Captain Reeve is Delta," he shouted. "First Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta." Megan's mind snagged on the word Delta like a hook. "That is not possible," she said, though it was the only thing she could say. The operator's gaze held steady. "He is also General Robert Reeve's son." Megan blinked hard. Her stomach rolled not from flight but from the sudden weight of what she had touched without knowing. The man she had hidden behind a curtain. The man Pierce had tried to discard. "Why was he in my ER?" Megan asked. The operator shook his head once. "We do not know everything. We know someone wants him dead. We know he was found before we could reach him. We know he is not safe unless he is with people he trusts." Megan looked down at her hands. They were still stained faintly yellow from iodine that never fully washed out. "He trusts me," she said, more like a question than a claim. "He trusts what you did," the operator replied. "That is enough for him." The helicopter banked. Megan's shoulder bumped the operator beside her. Her eyes squeezed shut. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw Pierce's face purple with rage and heard his voice. "We are not a charity. Clear the bed. Then he will die somewhere that does not cost us." The helicopter swung back toward the hospital. Sandhills Regional appeared through the rain, a block of concrete and glass lights glowing against morning gloom. The rooftop pad was designed for lighter medical transport. The Black Hawk did not care. The aircraft dropped onto the roof with a hard thud that sent a shiver through the building. Megan felt it in her spine. Dust puffed from ceiling tiles in her imagination. And sure enough, when the doors opened and she stepped into the hospital stairwell, she heard a distant alarm and the muffled shouts of staff looking up. Elevators were too slow. The operators took the stairs with Megan in the middle, their bodies forming a moving wall. The smell of hospital air hit her like memory. Bleach, plastic, old coffee, human fear. They reached the 4th floor and pushed into the hallway outside the ER. Chaos lived there now, not the usual medical chaos, but a different kind. Nurses huddled at the station with their heads tilted, listening to the roof. Residents stood in the corridor like they had forgotten what they were supposed to do with their hands. A security guard was on the phone with someone, voice high and cracking, and Dr. Clayton Pierce stood at the center of it, furious, shouting into a handset like he could bully the entire world into obeying. "I do not care who they are," Pierce barked. "This is private property. You tell the police to get those aircraft off my roof right now." He slammed the phone down and turned, face flushed, ready to unload on whoever had failed him next. He saw the operators. The hallway went quiet in a single breath. 6 men in tactical gear stepped out of the stairwell and spread without speaking, filling the corridor. Their rifles stayed slung, but their presence was a weapon on its own. Behind them came a man in dress uniform, silver hair clipped short, eyes pale and steady. He walked with a cane, but the cane did not slow him. It marked him as someone who had paid his dues in places Pierce had only seen on television. General Robert Reeve did not glance at the ceiling. He did not glance at the nurses. He looked straight at Pierce, as if Pierce were a problem to be solved. Megan stepped out behind the general blanket still on her shoulders, hair wet against her forehead. Her bruised exhaustion did not matter in this hallway. The air shifted around her like an invisible current. Pierce's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a second. "What is the meaning of this?" Pierce finally stammered. The general did not stop until he was close enough that Pierce had to tilt his chin up. "Are you Dr. Clayton Pierce?" the general asked. Pierce tried to recover his posture. "I am the chief of surgery, and you are trespassing in a sterile zone. I demand you remove these weapons and this fired employee immediately." The general turned his head slightly. "Secure the floor," he said to an operator. "No one enters or leaves without my authorization." Pierce's eyes widened. "You cannot do that." The general's gaze returned to Pierce. "This building contains a high-value asset in critical condition." Pierce drew himself up. "A high-value asset? You mean the unidentified vagrant my nurse insisted on keeping?" The general's expression did not change. "Nurse Hart is no longer your employee doctor." Megan's breath caught. "She is hereby designated as a specialized medical consultant to the Department of Defense." The general continued. "Effective immediately, she is primary care provider for Captain Mason Reeve." Pierce's face drained, then flushed again with anger. "That is absurd. She is a nurse." Megan stepped forward at the blanket slipping from her shoulders as she moved. She did not raise her voice. "Where is he?" she asked. Pierce's eyes snapped to her with pure venom. "You have some nerve coming back here after what you did." Megan held his gaze. "Where is my patient?" Pierce crossed his arms. "I had him moved." Something cold ran down Megan's spine. Moved where she demanded. Pierce's mouth twisted. "Basement holding area. Pending transfer to county. He is not my problem anymore." For a fraction of a second, Megan could not speak. The basement at Sandhills Regional was not clinical. It was storage. It was cold. Pipes. Old files. Broken equipment. A place where sound died. Megan's eyes went wide. "It is 50 degrees down there," she said. "He is fighting sepsis. The cold will push him into shock." Pierce shrugged as if temperature were a minor detail. Not my concern. Megan did not ask permission. She turned and ran. Her clogs slapped the floor. Her wet scrubs stuck to her skin. Behind her boots thundered as two operators moved with her silent and quick. Pierce shouted something, but the words fell behind her like debris. The service elevator doors were half hidden behind a supply alcove. Megan hit the button. The elevator took too long. Her foot bounced. Her fingers dug into her palm. When the doors finally opened, she stepped in operators, flanking her like shadows. The elevator descended with a mechanical groan. Megan stared at the numbers above the door. 3, 2, 1, B. The doors opened to a hallway that smelled of damp concrete. The lighting was dimmer down here, older. Megan's shoes squeaked on the floor. She followed memory, not signs, through a corridor lined with old stretchers and stacked chairs. A double door labeled Authorized Personnel Only stood at the end. Megan shoved it open. The room beyond was a storage space, pretending to be a holding area. Broken wheelchairs leaned against shelves. Cardboard boxes of old records sat on pallets. A janitor's cart stood abandoned near a mop sink. In the corner, on a stretcher with one crooked wheel, lay Mason Reeve. He looked smaller down here, not because he was small, but because the room swallowed him. He shivered so hard his teeth chattered the sound like bone on bone. His skin was pale lips, tinged bluish. The IV bag Megan had hung earlier was empty, collapsed like a dead thing. Blood had backed up into the line. Megan's heart slammed against her ribs. She rushed to him and grabbed his wrist. His pulse was thready fast, barely holding the rhythm. "Mason," she said, voice sharp. "Hey, look at me." His eyes fluttered. His focus drifted past her. "Hostiles," he rasped. "Southridge, Scorpion." "There are no hostiles," Megan said, stripping off the damp top scrub layer and using the dry undershirt beneath to cover his chest. "You are safe. You are cold, that is all." She turned to the operators. "Blankets, anything, coats, now." The operators moved instantly. One sprinted out. Another yanked a canvas drop cloth off a shelf and threw it over Mason like it was a parachute. The third returned moments later with a janitor's coat and a stack of thin hospital blankets scavenged from a linen cart. Megan layered them over Mason, then leaned close and listened to his breathing. It was shallow, fast. His skin felt chilled under her fingers. "We have to get him upstairs," she said. "ICU, warm fluids, new lines." The operators lifted the stretcher. The crooked wheel squealed. Megan pushed the IV pole beside them, running with her hands on the metal, guiding the chaotic rolling thing through the narrow hallway. Back in the elevator, Megan stared at Mason's face. His eyelids trembled, his jaw clenched with each shiver. She thought of Pierce's shrug. She felt something in her chest harden. The ICU doors opened to a very different world than the basement. Bright lights, clean floors, controlled air. Staff who looked up in alarm as a stretcher arrived, flanked by armed men. Megan did not slow. She took over the bed space like she belonged there because she did. "2 large-bore IVs," she said to a nurse who stepped in, eyes wide. "Warm fluids. Bear hugger if you have it. Monitor. Full panel labs now." The nurse moved hands quick-pulled into Megan's certainty. Megan's fingers found Mason's arm. His veins were collapsed from dehydration and shock. She palpated, felt a faint thread, and slid the needle in. Blood flashed. Relief hit her like oxygen. She started warm fluids. Mason's shivering eased slightly as heat returned in small increments. General Reeve entered the room with 2 operators, his cane tapping once sharp on the floor. He stood behind Megan without crowding her, but she could feel him solid as a wall. "How is he?" the general asked. "Hypothermic," Megan said. "Borderline shock. He should not have been down there." The general's gaze flicked to the door, as if he could see Pierce through walls. "Stabilize him," the general said. Megan nodded and kept moving. As the minutes passed, the monitor numbers shifted from desperate to less desperate. Heart rate still high but less chaotic, blood pressure still low but climbing. Then the lab results began to populate the screen. Megan stared mind-snapping into diagnostic mode. White blood cell count elevated, yes. That fit sepsis. But something else spiked in a way that did not match the story Pierce kept trying to force. Liver enzymes climbing faster than she liked. Eosinophils elevated. A pattern that felt wrong. She leaned in closer, eyes scanning each value. General Reeves' voice came low behind her. "Talk to me." Megan swallowed. "His temperature is coming up," she said. "But these labs do not make sense." A voice cut into the room from the doorway. Pierce. He had arrived with an administrator in a suit, a woman with a tight smile, and hands clasped like prayer. Pierce's eyes went to the monitor, then to Megan, then to the general. The anger in his face now had a layer of fear under it, like a dog seeing a bigger dog. "This is standard sepsis," Pierce said, voice forced calm. "She already stole vancomycin. Continue antibiotics. He needs dialysis if his organs fail." Megan did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the labs. "No," she said quietly. Pierce scoffed. "No." Megan turned then fully. "Look at the eosinophils. Look at the liver enzymes. This is not a normal infection pattern. This looks like toxicity." Pierce's eyebrows lifted in exaggerated disbelief. "Toxicity," he repeated. "You are fantasizing." Megan faced the general. "Sir, where was he? Specifically, what environment?" The general's jaw tightened. "Classified." Megan did not blink. "Then we treat blind," she said, "and blind treatment might kill him." Pierce stepped forward. "This is insane. She is a nurse general. She is overstepping. I will not allow her to administer experimental drugs." Megan ignored him. Her eyes held the general's. "Your son is dying not from infection alone," she thought. But she did not speak the words with drama. She did not have time for drama. General Reeve exhaled once through his nose. It looked like surrender and respect at the same time. "Golden Triangle," he said, voice low. "Synthetic opioid lab. Unknown compounds. Chemical storage." Megan's mind clicked. She turned back to the monitor, then to Mason's face. His skin sheen. His sweat. The way his body had looked like it was burning from the inside while also shutting down. "Chemical exposure," she said. Pierce laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You watch too many movies." Megan stepped closer to Pierce, voice rising for the first time not from panic, but from refusal. "Dialysis will kill him right now," she said. "His heart cannot take that stress. He needs antidote protocol." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "You are not ordering anything." Megan snapped to the medication cart. "Atropine and pralidoxime," she said to the nurse beside her. "Now." Pierce moved fast, stepping between Megan and the cart, hand out like a barrier. "I will not allow you to give nerve agent antidotes to a septic patient," he said. "That is malpractice." For a beat the room held its breath. Then the monitor screamed, a high-pitched alarm that cut through every other sound. Mason's heart rhythm spiked, fragmented, then collapsed into a flat line that turned Megan's blood to ice. "He is crashing," Megan shouted. She shoved Pierce back with her shoulder hard enough to send him stumbling into a linen cart. Sheets tumbled. Pierce hit the floor with a shocked grunt. Megan was already moving. She yanked the crash cart closer, hand snapping open drawers. "Code blue," she yelled. "Charge to 200. The nurse at the bed moved in, hands flying to begin compressions. Megan grabbed the defibrillator paddles and pressed them to Mason's chest. "Clear," she barked. The shock hit. Mason's body jolted. The monitor stayed flat. 300, Megan said, voice tight. "Clear." Another shock, another jolt. Nothing. Megan's throat tightened. She could feel the room closing and the sound of boots shifting, the harsh breathing of people trying not to panic. Pierce's voice came from the floor, bitter and smug even now. "Let him go. He is gone. You did this." A metallic click sounded. Megan glanced up and saw General Reeves' sidearm leveled at Pierce's head. The general's face was calm. His eyes were not. "One more word," the general said quietly. Pierce went silent. Megan dropped to the bed and took over compressions herself. Her hands locked, her shoulders drove down. The chest gave slightly under the force. She pushed through it, counting in her head, letting the rhythm anchor her. 1, 2, 3. Sweat ran into her eyes. Her arms burned. She did not stop. Epinephrine, she snapped, 1 milligram. A younger nurse stepped in, hands trembling, but she had the syringe ready. She pushed it into the line at Megan's direction. Megan kept compressions going. The world narrowed to the feel of bone beneath her palms and the sound of the monitor refusing to cooperate. "Come on," she whispered without meaning to. "Come on, Mason." 2 minutes passed like a lifetime. Then a blip appeared on the screen. Then another. Then a jagged rhythm that looked ugly but alive. "Stop compressions," Megan said. Hands pulled back. The room froze. The rhythm steadied into a fast but sustainable line. "Sinus tachycardia." Megan breathed, and only then realized she had been holding her breath. "He is back." She did not hesitate. She grabbed the atropine syringe with fingers that did not shake. Pierce tried to rise, face pale. "You cannot," he rasped. General Reeve shifted the gun slightly. Pierce stopped moving. Megan slammed the syringe into the IV port and pushed the drug in. Then the pralidoxime. The room watched the monitor like it was a verdict. 10 seconds. 20. Mason's heart rate began to drop. 140, 130, 115, 100. Blood pressure climbed. 90/60. 100/65. 110/70. Megan sagged against the bedrail legs, suddenly weak chest tight with the aftershock of adrenaline. "He is stabilizing," she said, voice barely above a whisper. General Reeve holstered his weapon. He stepped closer to the bed and looked down at his son with something in his eyes that Megan did not often see in men like him. Not softness, not relief. Something older, something like reverence. Then the general turned toward Pierce. Pierce was on his knees now, pushing himself up with shaking hands, trying to smooth his coat like that could smooth his situation. General Reeve spoke without raising his voice. "Get him out of this room," he said to his operators. "Lock him in his office." Pierce's mouth opened. "You cannot do this. I know senators. I will have your career." General Reeve leaned in close enough that Pierce could hear him without anyone else needing to. "My son was lying in your basement," the general said. "If he dies because you wanted to save money on a transfer, you will not need a lawyer." Pierce swallowed hard. His bravado cracked like thin ice. He looked past the general to Megan, hatred burning behind fear. 2 operators lifted Pierce by the arms and marched him out. Pierce's shoes squeaked on the floor, a small, humiliating sound that did not match the power he had been throwing around all night. When the door shut behind them, the room exhaled. Megan wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Her hands were smeared with saline and iodine, and the faint red shadow of Mason's blood where the line had bled back. She leaned close to Mason's face. His skin looked less gray now. His breathing was steadier. His eyelids fluttered, but he did not wake. The sedation of shock and medication held him under. Megan adjusted the blankets and checked the IV sites. She spoke to the nurse beside her in short instructions, then finally stepped back enough to see the whole bed, the whole man, the whole narrow margin they had pulled him back from. General Reeve remained near the foot of the bed. He watched Megan work as if he were memorizing her movements. "You saved him," the general said. Megan did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the monitor on the numbers that could change in a heartbeat. "I kept him alive," she replied. "For now." The general's cane tapped once on the floor as he shifted his weight. He glanced at the door, then back at his son. "The hospital is secured," he said, voice low. "No one gets near him without clearance." Megan nodded, but her focus did not loosen. She had been in too many rooms where people thought the crisis was over when the monitor stopped screaming. She knew better. She reached for a pen and wrote on the whiteboard above the bed, her handwriting quick and firm. Primary contact nurse Megan Hart. Then she wrote the medication times, the fluids, the labs to repeat, the temperature checks. She set the marker down and looked at Mason again, studying the line of his jaw, the old scars, the way his body carried a history even in stillness. His hand twitched once against the sheet. Megan's gaze went to the monitor. The rhythm stayed steady. Outside, the room boots moved in the hallway. Voices murmured behind glass. A hospital that had belonged to policies and billing codes a few hours ago now belonged to armed men and urgent quiet. Megan did not step away from the bed. She stood there in wet scrubs, blanket gone, hair drying in stiff strands, and watched the numbers like they were the only honest thing in the world. By the time the sun climbed high enough to bleach the rain off the windows, the ICU no longer felt like part of a civilian hospital. It felt like a place claimed. Operators sat in chairs meant for worried families, their backs against the wall, eyes scanning every doorway and reflective surface. A pair of boots stood beside a stack of pizza boxes on a side table. Someone had set bottled water next to a metal case stenciled with serial numbers. Nurses moved through it all with tight faces and clipped voices doing their work while trying not to stare at rifles slung across chests. Megan Hart slept on a folding cot pushed against the far wall of Mason Reeves' room. She slept in fragments, head turning toward the monitor every time the rhythm changed by a single beat. Her body understood alarms even when her mind was underwater. She would blink awake glance at heart rate and pressure, then sink back into a shallow doze that never reached rest. When she woke again, her throat was dry and her shoulders ached like she had been carrying a person for miles. She sat up slowly and looked at Mason. He was awake. Not fully upright, not ready to stand, but awake enough that his eyes tracked her movement. His skin had color now, a muted warmth, instead of the cold gray from the basement. The bandage at his side was fresh, clean, layered carefully. His right arm lay along the blanket IV line, taped down, bruising already blooming around the insertion site. His mouth moved as if he were testing words. "You're staring," Megan said, voice rough with sleep. Mason's lips twitched. "I'm evaluating the damage." "You want a mirror?" Megan replied. "I've seen worse." He let out a quiet sound that might have been a laugh if he had more air. "Your needlework is a crime." Megan stood and stepped closer, checking the IV bag and the pump settings. "Your veins are a crime. They're hiding." Mason's gaze followed her hands. She noticed the way he watched, not in a romantic way, not soft. It was the way he watched everything, like he learned the world through details. A twitch in a finger, a shift in breath, a pause before an answer. "You didn't leave," he said. Megan's fingers paused on the tape. "I'm on a cot in your room." "Where would I go?" Mason's eyes narrowed slightly, then softened at the edges. "People leave," he said, simple as a fact. Megan adjusted the blanket around his shoulders and checked his temperature probe. "Try not to make it so easy," she replied. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Megan looked up. Tom, the security guard who had taken her badge, stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides like a man approaching a wound he had helped make. He was not in his usual posture. His shoulders were drawn tight. His eyes were red-rimmed like he had not slept either. "Megan," he said. She held his gaze for a second. She did not offer him comfort. She had none to spare. Tom swallowed. "They've got Pierce in his office. 2 of those soldiers are standing outside his door. He keeps yelling about lawyers." Megan turned back to Mason's monitor as if the numbers needed her more than the hospital drama did. "Good." Tom's mouth tightened. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry." Megan's hand pressed lightly to the IV line. "You already said that." Tom's eyes dropped to the floor. "I know." Mason watched the exchange without speaking. His face gave nothing away, but his fingers moved once beneath the blanket, a small flex like a muscle preparing to act. Tom shifted uncomfortable under Mason's stare. "General Reeve asked me to bring you coffee," he said quickly, as if the coffee could patch what he had broken. "Black. No sugar." Megan took the cup. The heat seeped into her palm. "Thanks," she said, not because she felt grateful, but because the word kept the room from becoming something else. Tom nodded, then lingered at the door. "If you need anything," he began. Megan looked up again, eyes steady. "I need this hospital to stop letting people like Pierce decide who lives," she said. Tom flinched as if struck. He nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind him. Megan sipped the coffee. It tasted burnt and cheap and life-saving. Mason's voice came low. "He took your badge." Megan set the cup down. He followed orders. Mason's eyes sharpened. "Orders can be wrong." Megan looked at him. "I know." For a moment, the room held quiet, the kind that comes when two people recognize a truth without dressing it up. Megan turned back to the chart and clicked through lab values. Mason's numbers were improving. Temperature stable. Pressure holding. The liver enzymes had started to creep down after the antidote, confirming what her gut had told her when the pattern did not fit sepsis alone. A nurse entered with fresh fluids and a new bag of antibiotics. She moved carefully, eyes flicking once toward the hallway where boots shifted and murmurs carried. She avoided looking at Mason directly, as if looking would invite questions she did not want to answer. When she left, Megan leaned closer to Mason and lowered her voice. "How did you end up in an alley?" she asked. Mason's jaw tightened. His gaze moved to the ceiling as if the answer lived there. "Bad night," he said. Megan waited. Silence was a tool she knew how to use. Mason exhaled slowly. "Someone knew where we would be," he said. "Someone fed a schedule to people who should not have had it." Megan kept her face neutral, but a cold pressure formed behind her ribs. "And you got out," she said. Mason's mouth twisted. "I got out enough to bleed and keep moving until I didn't." Megan thought of the incision. Clean, deliberate. That wound wasn't from a car crash, she said. Mason looked at her, and for the first time his gaze held something like respect instead of assessment. "No," he admitted. Megan did not press further. She had learned that people who lived through violence carried their stories like loaded weapons. You did not grab for them. The door opened again, this time with a different weight. General Robert Reeve stepped in cane-in-hand, eyes scanning Mason first, then Megan. Behind him stood an operator with a tablet, calm and unreadable. "How is he?" the general asked. Megan gave him facts, not comfort. "Stable, still weak, organs recovering, no dialysis." The general nodded once, as if checking off a list that only existed in his head. He looked down at his son. "You scared your mother," he said. Mason's lips twitched. "Tell her I'm charming again." The general's expression almost shifted. "Almost." "You will call her when you can speak without sounding like a gravel truck," he replied. Megan turned back to the chart. The general's gaze moved to her hands again, the way a man looks at the thing that held his world together when it was coming apart. "You walked," he said. Megan did not look up. "I didn't have a ride." "You were fired," the general continued. Megan's throat tightened. "Yes." The operator with the tablet stepped forward. "The hospital board has started an incident report," he said. "They're discussing suspension pending investigation. There's mention of medication diversion and assault." Megan's jaw clenched. "Assault," she repeated. The operator kept his tone neutral. "They'll use that word." Mason's gaze sharpened. "Let them," he rasped. The general lifted a hand slightly, not to stop him, but to slow the room. "This will be handled," he said. Megan finally looked up. Handled by who, she asked. The board that let Pierce run this place like a billing office. The general held her stare. "Handled by people who understand what Pierce attempted," he said. Megan waited for him to say attempted murder. He did not. He did not need to. The meaning sat there anyway, heavy and ugly. The general's radio crackled softly. He listened, then nodded once to the operator with the tablet. "Continue securing access," he said. "No unscheduled staff in the wing." "Yes, sir," the operator replied. General Reeve turned toward the door. "Nurse Hart," he said, and Megan felt the strange weight of being addressed like she belonged to something bigger than a hospital. "Do not leave this room without someone with you." Megan's lips pressed together. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. The general paused, then left cane tapping once the sound sharpened the quiet. Megan returned to her tasks, refilling water, adjusting tubing, checking skin color and capillary refill. Mason watched her, and after a long time he spoke again. Why, he asked. Megan didn't pretend not to understand. Why what? Why did you stay? Mason said. You didn't know me. Megan's hands slowed. She took a breath, then let it out carefully. The answer was not something she said out loud often. It lived behind her ribs, close to the place where anger and grief shared a wall. My brother was a Marine, she said, voice low. He came home different. He drank too much. He got loud. People saw the smell and the clothes and decided that was all he was. Mason's eyes did not move. He listened like a man trained to take in the truth without flinching. He went to the VA once, Megan continued. He sat in a waiting room for hours. He left. Nobody followed him. Nobody asked his name twice. Her throat tightened. He died 2 weeks later, alone, and everybody acted like it was inevitable. Megan's fingers gripped the bed rail until her knuckles whitened. I promised myself I would not look away from someone just because the paperwork was missing. Mason's gaze held hers. The steel in it softened again, not into sweetness, but into something steadier. You lost your job for that, he said. Megan shrugged once sharp. Pierce took my job. I made my choice. Mason's voice came quieter. You were right. Megan looked away first because the words landed too close to her raw places. The door opened. A man stepped in wearing surgical scrubs and a mask pushing a medication cart. He moved like he belonged. Head down, shoulders slightly hunched. The wheels of the cart whispered over the floor. Scheduled meds, the man mumbled. Megan's instincts lit up before her mind caught up. She had spent too long in emergency rooms not to recognize the way danger sometimes wore ordinary clothing. She stepped between the cart and the bed. I handle all meds for this patient, she said. The man froze. It was a small pause, a fraction too long, the pause of someone searching for the next line in a script. Megan's gaze dropped to his shoes. Not hospital clogs, not sneakers. Heavy black leather boots, expensive, clean enough to be out of place in a trauma ward. Boots that looked like they had never run through hospital hallways. Her eyes lifted to his wrist where the scrub cuff had ridden up slightly. A tattoo. Black ink in the shape of a scorpion. Megan's stomach went cold. She remembered Mason's delirium in the basement. Scorpion. Her voice rose sharp enough to cut through the hum of machines. Step away from the cart, she said. The man's head lifted. His eyes were flat. Dead in a way Megan had seen before in violent patients and in men who came back from places that changed them. His hand slid into his scrub pocket, not toward a pen, not toward a stethoscope. Mason's body moved before it should have been able to. He tried to sit up, face tightening with pain. Gun, Mason rasped. Megan did not freeze. She grabbed the metal kidney dish from the bedside table and hurled it with everything in her. The dish struck the man's face as his hand cleared the pocket. A suppressed pistol appeared in his grip. The first shot cracked the window behind Mason glass, spiderwebbing the sound swallowed by the suppressor, but still loud enough to make the monitors jitter. The man staggered, blood streaming from his nose, then raised the pistol again. Megan's hands reached for the call button, but the man's aim was already swinging. Mason ripped the IV lines from his arm and launched himself off the bed with a roar that sounded like pain turned into a weapon. He slammed into the assassin, driving him backward into the cart. Vials and syringes flew clattering on the floor. The assassin was stronger. He threw an elbow into Mason's face, sending him crashing into the wall. Mason slid down, breath gone, eyes burning. The pistol swung toward Mason's head. Megan's gaze snapped to the corner of the room. An oxygen tank stood upright beside the wall, steel and heavy. She grabbed it with both hands, the weight dragging at her shoulders, then swung it like a bat. The tank connected with the back of the assassin's skull with a sickening crack. The man dropped like his strings had been cut. The pistol clattered across the floor and stopped near Megan's foot. For a heartbeat, the room held still. Then Megan's hands began to shake. The door burst open. General Reeve flooded in with 3 operators, weapons raised. Their eyes scanned fast-trained. They saw the unconscious man on the floor, the scorpion tattoo visible. They saw Mason slumped against the wall, blood at his mouth arm, dripping where the IV had been ripped out. They saw Megan, standing with the oxygen tank in her hands, chest heaving, eyes wide. General Reeves' gaze locked on the tattoo. His face tightened. "We have a breach," he said quietly. Megan swallowed hard. "He walked in like staff," she said. He knew the room. Mason pushed himself up, one hand on the bed for support. "They're inside," he rasped. "Not just outside." The general nodded once, jaw set. He spoke into his radio in short-clipped commands. Operators moved to the hallway, calling for lockdown, sweeping adjacent rooms. Megan stepped toward Mason, hands hovering near his arm, wanting to help but afraid to hurt. "You're bleeding," she said. "I'll live," Mason replied. General Reeve looked at Megan. "If they can put a man in scrubs in this wing, they can put anything in this hospital," he said. Megan's voice came steadier than she felt. "Then we can't stay here," she replied. The general studied her, weighing her words with the seriousness he gave to operations. "Where?" he asked. Megan's mind flashed to her father's cabin in the mountains. Old pine boards and a stone fireplace, no neighbors close enough to hear a scream. A place without cameras and keycards and staff entrances. "My family has a cabin up near Blackwood Ridge," she said. "Blue Ridge Mountains. Off-grid, no cell service, no internet." One road in. The general's gaze narrowed. A civilian cabin. Megan held his eyes. A place where a fake nurse can't walk in with a cart and a gun. Mason's breathing slowed as he listened. He nodded once small. "Do it," he said. General Reeve looked at his son for a long second, then back to Megan. "Lead," he said. The operators moved immediately, not asking questions, already shifting to extraction. One grabbed the dropped pistol and kicked it away. Another placed zip ties on the assassin's wrists, checking pulse, checking for a second weapon. Megan turned back to Mason. The blood at his arm made her stomach twist. She pulled gauze from the supply drawer and pressed it to the torn IV site. Her hands steady again, now that the next task had a shape. "We need to rebandage you," she said. Mason's eyes stayed on the door. "In the truck," he replied. Within minutes, Mason was in fresh clothes sourced by someone who knew how to get whatever they needed. Megan changed too, replacing wet scrubs with plain clothing that felt strange on her skin after nights spent in uniform. She collected what little she had left, a phone. Her wallet, the stethoscope Pierce had made her leave behind, now returned by a quiet nurse who slid it into Megan's hand without speaking. When Megan walked out of the ICU, the hallway looked different. Nurses watched her with faces caught between fear and awe. Security stood stiff, uncertain of who owned the building now. Operators lined the corridor like sentinels. Outside, the rain had eased into mist. A line of black SUVs waited at the service entrance, engines running, windows tinted. General Reeve gestured once, and the convoy began to move. Megan climbed into the middle vehicle, her father's old truck pressed into service for camouflage, the familiar steering wheel rough under her palms. Mason slid into the passenger seat, jaw-tight, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the parking lot as if the asphalt could hide something. Megan started the engine. The truck pulled forward into the line taillights glowing red through the fog. As the convoy merged onto the highway, Megan kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the wet road ahead, feeling the weight of the stethoscope in her bag and the weight of everything that had changed in a single night. The convoy left the city behind in a steady ribbon of headlights and rain. Fayetteville dissolved into low concrete gas stations glowing under wet neon, and then into dark stretches of highway where the only light came from the vehicles around them and the occasional flash of a billboard. The wipers on Megan Hart's father's old truck dragged back and forth with a tired squeak, clearing a narrow view of the road. Her hands stayed locked at 10 and two knuckles pale against the cracked leather wheel. Mason Reeve sat in the passenger seat with a rifle across his knees. His face was drawn and pale, but his eyes stayed sharp, tracking every on-ramp and every car that drifted too close. When the truck hit a pothole, his jaw tightened, pain flickering across his features. He did not complain. He adjusted the sling on his arm, then looked out the side window as if the night might hide a threat in the brush. Megan glanced at his bandage for half a second, then forced her eyes back to the road. "You are bleeding through," she said. "I will live," Mason replied. "That is not the standard I aim for." "Megan," said voice flat. Mason's mouth twitched. "You are still in nurse mode." Megan swallowed. "That is all I know how to be." A burst of static crackled from the radio, clipped to the dash, the convoy frequency routed into Megan's truck for the sake of coordination. General Robert Reeves' voice came through clear and controlled. "Status." One of the operators in the lead SUV answered. "Middle vehicle stable. No tail, no contact." General Reeves' response was brief. "Maintain spacing, no stops." Megan drove as instructed. No stops meant no bathroom breaks, no coffee, no moment to let her hands stop shaking. It meant motion, which felt safer than stillness. The weather shifted as they climbed. Rain thinned into mist. The air cooled and the smell changed from asphalt and exhaust to pine and wet earth. The highway narrowed into a 2-lane road, then into a winding climb where the trees pressed closer branches black against the pale sky. Megan's phone had no signal now. The absence felt strange, like a missing tooth. For years, she had lived with alerts and messages and the hum of constant connectivity. Now there was only the road, the wipers, the radio, and the quiet weight of Mason's presence beside her. How far, Mason asked. 20 miles, Megan said. "Once we hit the logging road, it gets rough." Mason's gaze flicked toward her. "Your father took you there." Megan nodded. "Every summer. When my mom needed quiet. When my dad needed to pretend the world could not reach him." Mason looked out the window again. "Sounds like my kind of place." The SUVs behind them kept formation. Megan could see their headlights in the rearview mirror, steady and disciplined. This did not feel like a normal escort. It felt like an extraction. The paved road ended at a gravel turnoff, marked by a battered wooden sign that read Blackwood Ridge. The letters were faded, carved decades ago. Megan eased the truck onto the logging road. Mud grabbed at the tires and the truck fishtailed slightly before she corrected. The SUVs followed engines growling their suspensions, swallowing ruts that would have stopped most vehicles. Megan's truck climbed through dense trees that leaned over the road like a tunnel. The sky overhead darkened as the last daylight faded. No streetlights. No houses. No signs of anyone else. After a final bend, the cabin appeared. It sat on a rise above a steep valley built from rough timber, its roof dark and heavy. A stone chimney rose from one side. The porch sagged slightly with age. A shed stood off to the right half, hidden by trees. The place looked like it had been built to survive winters and be forgotten. Megan pulled up and killed the engine. The sudden quiet rang in her ears. Operators poured out of the SUVs. They moved into positions with practiced efficiency, 2 taking the tree line, 1 circling the cabin, another scanning the ridge line with thermal optics. Flashlights stayed off. Commands were short and low. The night absorbed their movement. General Reeve stepped out of the lead vehicle, cane in hand. He looked up at the cabin, then at the dark valley beyond it. His eyes did not soften. He was not here to enjoy scenery. Mason opened the passenger door and put his boots on the mud. He moved slowly, careful of his leg, but he did not accept help until Megan's hand touched his elbow. "Just balance," she said. Mason glanced at her hand, then nodded once and used it. His weight felt heavier than it should not, because he was large, but because he was fighting weakness with stubborn will. They crossed the porch. The wood creaked. Megan unlocked the door with a key she had not used in years. The lock resisted, then turned. The door opened with a long groan of old hinges. Inside, the cabin smelled stale and cold. Pine boards, old smoke, and dust that had settled into everything. Megan stepped in and flicked a switch out of habit. Nothing happened. No power, she said. One less signal, Mason replied. Megan moved to the fireplace and knelt, hand searching for kindling in the old metal bucket. Her fingers found dry wood. She stacked it quickly the way her father had taught her. Her hands shook once, then steadied. Work was a language she could still speak fluently. Mason lowered himself into a chair near the hearth, breathing shallowly as he sat. He watched her build the fire like it mattered. An operator stepped inside behind them. "Perimeter is being established," he said. "Generators in the shed." Megan nodded. "It is loud. Only use it if we need it." The operator acknowledged and stepped back out. Megan struck a match. The flame flared small and bright in the dark room. She held it to the kindling, waited as it caught, then fed it with another sliver of wood. The fire took slow at first, then stronger orange light spreading across the room, turning cold boards into warm shadows. She rose and turned to Mason. "Let me see the arm." Mason extended it. The sling came off with care. Megan peeled back the bandage and assessed the torn IV sites and the bruising. His skin was mottled with evidence of a body that had fought too hard recently. She cleaned the area and rewrapped it with supplies pulled from a medical bag she had grabbed in the hospital during the scramble. Gauze, tape, antiseptic, basic medications. Mason watched her hands again. "You always look like you are about to argue with God," he said. Megan pressed tape down firmly. "God does not do triage," she replied. "I do." Mason let out a low exhale that might have been a laugh. "You keep talking like that and my father will adopt you." Megan did not smile, but something in her chest loosened for a heartbeat. "He already drafted me," she said. Outside, the night deepened. The wind moved through trees with a steady hiss. From the porch, an operator's silhouette shifted as he took up a watch position. A second figure moved farther out, barely visible between trunks. Inside, the fire crackled. The warmth spread slowly, not enough to erase the chill, but enough to make breathing easier. Megan checked Mason's pulse, then his temperature with a small digital thermometer. She listened to his lungs with her stethoscope, the familiar pressure of the earpieces grounding her. The breaths were clear, though shallow. His heart still ran fast, but less frantic than before. "You should sleep," she said. Mason's eyes flicked toward the window. "I can sleep later." "You cannot keep running on adrenaline," Megan replied. Mason's gaze returned to her face. "You have been running on it for 10 years. Megan swallowed the response she wanted to give. She looked away and reached into a cabinet for canned food. Peaches beans, a jar of something her father had left years ago. She found peaches in a can opener, and she opened the can, poured the fruit into 2 chipped bowls, and handed one to Mason. He took it with his good hand. They ate quietly, the kind of quiet that did not demand conversation. Firelight moved across Mason's face, catching on the edges of old scars. Megan noticed them now in the calm, thin lines across knuckles, a faint mark near his hairline, the hard set of his jaw that suggested habits formed under pressure. Megan's mind tried to organize what had happened. Hospital, basement, code blue, assassin in scrubs. Now this cabin surrounded by armed men who took orders from her patient's father. The world had tilted so far it felt unreal, but her hand still knew how to measure clean wrap and stabilize. That made it real enough. Hours passed. The fire settled into glowing coals. One operator stepped inside briefly to warm his hands, then rotated out. General Reeve came in once, scanning Mason and Megan with a look that said he trusted nothing and no one, then took a seat near the window with binoculars that could see heat signatures in the dark. Megan lay down on a worn rug near the hearth, her coat folded under her head. She did not sleep. She watched the ceiling, listened to the wind, and counted Mason's breaths when the room got too quiet. At 3 a.m, the radio on General Reeves' vest hissed. His head lifted instantly. His posture changed, a man shifting from watchful to engaged. A voice crackled through, low and urgent. "Contact, Sector North, movement in the trees." General Reeves stood. How many? 20, maybe 30, the voice answered. They are spreading. No lights. They know what they are doing. Megan pushed herself up, heart jumping. Mason's hand went to the rifle beside him. They found us, Mason said, voice tight. General Reeves' eyes narrowed, calculating. We left the hospital clean, he said, more to himself than to anyone. We checked vehicles. We ditched phones. Megan's mind raced. The assassin. The tattoo. The med cart. The bag. Her gaze snapped to the medical bag on the kitchen table, the one she had carried from the hospital because she could not bear the thought of being without supplies if Mason crashed again. Mason followed her gaze. He stood with a grimace, pain flashing, and crossed the room. His hand yanked the bag off the table and dumped it onto the floor. Bandages spilled. Syringes rolled. A bottle of antiseptic clinked against wood. Then Megan saw it. A small device no bigger than a matchbox sat wedged inside a sterile gauze pack. A red light blinked slow and steady like a heartbeat that did not belong. Megan's mouth went dry. A beacon, Mason said, voice filled with cold fury. He planted it. Megan stared at the blinking light. The realization hit like nausea. She had brought it here. She had carried the enemy's eyes into the cabin with her own hands. I did not know, she whispered. Mason's gaze snapped to her. You could not have, he said. His voice softened just enough to keep her from spiraling. They designed it for that. General Reeve moved fast. Kill the device, he ordered. One of the operators stepped in, took out a tool, and crushed the beacon under his boot with a single controlled motion. The red light died. The room held a brief silence as if listening for what the death of that light would change. Outside, the first shot shattered the window. Glass exploded inward, spraying the floor. The oil lamp on the table blew out. Darkness swallowed the room except for the fire's low glow. Down General Reeve barked. Megan dropped behind the overturned couch as operators moved with practiced speed rifles up bodies, shifting into positions that used walls and angles. Mason crouched beside the fireplace, teeth clenched, rifle braced. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Bullets chewed into the cabin's walls, splintering wood. The sound was not like movies. It was harsh and brutal, tearing at the air. The cabin shook with impacts. Dust rained from the ceiling. Megan covered her head, breath catching in her throat. An operator near the door returned fire in controlled bursts, the muzzle flash brief and bright. Another moved to a side window, firing into the darkness where heat signatures moved like ghosts. They are flanking, a voice shouted from outside through the radio. 2 teams, left and right. Megan forced herself to breathe. She peeked over the couch edge for 1 second and saw Mason's face set in grim concentration. He fired once, then again, each shot measured. He looked too calm for the chaos. It terrified her and steadied her at the same time. Then something heavier hit. A whoosh of air and an explosion slammed into the cabin's south wall. The wall disintegrated in a spray of wood and insulation, blasting the room with splinters. Megan screamed, the sound swallowed by the roar. The blast shoved her sideways. Her shoulders slammed into the floor. The fire flared, then sputtered under debris. Smoke and dust filled the air, thick and choking. Megan coughed hard, eyes watering. The taste of ash coated her tongue. They have rockets, an operator shouted. General Reeves' voice cut through. We cannot hold this building. Mason changed magazines with a quick motion, wincing as his injured leg shifted. We hold or we die, he said. Megan crawled behind the couch, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack ribs. She tried to think like a nurse, like someone trained to act under pressure. Identify the threat. Stabilize, ye. Her eyes flicked to the pantry door, half open. She saw the corner of the floorboards near it, the place where her grandfather used to store moonshine and her father used to hide old fishing gear. The root cellar entrance. The tunnel that led down the ravine to the creek bed. Megan's mind grabbed it like a lifeline. She raised her voice over the gunfire. The root cellar, she shouted. General Reeve turned toward her, eyes sharp. What? Megan crawled toward the pantry, bullets thudding into wood above her head. Under the pantry, she yelled, "There is a tunnel. It comes out in the creek bed down the ravine." General Reeves' gaze snapped to Mason. They communicated in a look, the kind of look men in combat understood without words. Mason nodded once. "Take them through," he said. "Flank them." General Reeves' face tightened. "I am not leaving you." Mason's mouth pulled into something fierce. "You do not have a choice." "I cannot run. I can shoot. She can guide you." Megan's breath hitched. She did not want to be the reason they separated. She did not want any of this. But the tunnel was real, and the enemy was already at the walls. General Reeve hesitated for a fraction of a second, the only hesitation Megan had ever seen in him. Then he nodded. "2 operators with me," the general ordered. "2 stay here." The team split instantly. 1 operator covered the blown wall with suppressive fire. Another moved to the pantry with General Reeve. Megan scrambled to the floorboards and shoved aside a rug. Her hands found the seam in the wood. She pried. The boards lifted with a groan. Cold air rose from beneath, damp and earthy. "Go, Megan," said voice shaking. General Reeve placed a hand on her shoulder for one brief moment. It was not comfort. It was acknowledgement. "You did well," he said. Then he disappeared into the darkness with 2 operators' boots thudding softly on the ladder rungs down into the tunnel. Megan turned back toward Mason. They were alone in the main room now, with 2 operators still inside, but the general's presence had been like a steel bar across the cabin. Without it, the chaos felt closer, the danger more intimate. Mason shifted against the rubble where the south wall used to be. His breathing was heavier now, pain dragging at him. He kept firing in short, controlled bursts, then paused to listen, head tilted as if he could hear footsteps in the smoke. Megan crawled toward him, staying low. "Tell me what to do," she shouted. Mason looked at her eyes, hard but steady. "You get a weapon," he said. "I do not have," Megan began. Mason reached into a bag at his side and pulled out a compact pistol. He held it out grip first. Megan stared at it. The metal looked too clean, too heavy, too real. "You know how to use this?" Mason asked. Megan's mouth went dry. She took it with both hands. Her fingers felt clumsy, as if they belonged to someone else. Mason's voice dropped, cutting through the noise with focus. "Point, sight, breathe out, squeeze." Megan's hands trembled. "Do not pull," Mason said. "Squeeze." Megan nodded because she could not find words. Another rocket hit outside, shaking the ground. The cabin groaned under the impact. Megan's ears rang. She tasted blood where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. The gunfire outside paused briefly. Mason's eyes narrowed. "Reload," he muttered. "They are about to breach." Shadows moved at the edge of the blown wall. Men in black gear, moving cautious, and professional rifles raised, faces hidden. They approached like predators that believed the prey was already wounded. Mason lowered his voice. "Wait." The first attacker stepped through the gap. Mason fired once. The man dropped, hit center mass collapsing into the rubble. The sound of his body hitting wood was dull and final. The attackers shouted. Chaos surged back. Gunfire burst into the room, bullets splintering the overturned table. Megan crouched behind it, pistol clutched tight, heart hammering. Her mind screamed at her to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The tunnel was behind the pantry, and Mason could not reach it in time. The operators with the general were already moving through darkness to flank the enemy, so Megan stayed. A figure moved on the left side of the cabin, slipping in through a side window that had shattered. He was faster than Mason's line of sight, flanking rifle rising toward Mason's exposed shoulder. Megan saw it in a flash, like a snapshot burned into her eyes. Mason did not. Megan stood. Her body moved before her fear could stop it. She raised the pistol the way Mason had said. The sights wobbled. Her breath caught. She forced it out. Squeeze. The pistol kicked hard in her hands. The sound was smaller than the rifle's, but still loud in the enclosed space. The attacker jerked, stumbled, his rifle dipping. He grabbed his shoulder and fell backward, out of view. Megan's hands shook violently after the shot. She wanted to drop the pistol. She wanted to vomit. She wanted to crawl into the floorboards and disappear. Mason glanced at her eyes wide for half a second, then fierce. "Good," he shouted. His voice did something strange to Megan. It anchored her. It turned her from a person trapped in someone else's war into a person choosing to stand. Gunfire intensified. Smoke thickened. The fire had died now, smothered under debris, leaving only a faint glow under cracked logs. The cabin was lit by muzzle flashes and pale moonlight leaking through broken walls. Megan ducked as a bullet ripped through the table edge inches from her head. Wood chips sprayed her face. She blinked them away, breath ragged. Mason dragged himself slightly to a new position, teeth clenched, rifle braced. He fired again, then again. His movements were slower now, pain pulling at him. He was bleeding through the bandage at his side, a dark stain spreading under his shirt. Megan yelled. He did not look at her. "Keep low," he snapped. Something rolled across the floor. At first, Megan thought it was a flashlight. Then she saw the shape and the way it spun metal glinting. A grenade. It came to a stop near the overturned table, close enough that Megan could see the pinless top and the curve of its body. Her brain froze for a heartbeat, unable to translate the object into action. Mason's voice exploded through the smoke. "Grenade!" He threw himself toward her. Megan barely had time to turn before Mason slammed into her, driving her down his body, covering hers like a shield. His weight crushed the air from her lungs. She smelled sweat smoke and the sharp metallic scent of blood. The blast hit. The world turned white, then went silent. Megan did not hear the explosion so much as feel it. Pressure slammed through her chest. The floor jumped. Something heavy struck her shoulder. Light vanished. The silence that followed was thick and wrong, like the world had been wrapped in cotton. When Megan opened her eyes, she could not remember how to breathe. Dust filled the air, swirling in faint shafts of moonlight that pierced through a shattered section of roof. Her ears rang with a high, thin whine. Her mouth tasted like ash. Her ribs ached with each shallow attempt at air. She coughed, and the cough hurt so badly her vision blurred. A pine beam lay across her legs. Splinters bit into her skin. Megan forced her hands under the beam and pushed. The wood shifted an inch, then another. Pain flared through her thighs, but adrenaline shoved it aside. She shoved again until the beam rolled off. She crawled. Her palms scraped over broken boards and glass. Her fingernails caught on nails that had been torn from walls. She dragged herself through debris, blinking grit from her eyes. Mason she tried to call, but her voice came out as a ragged rasp. She coughed again, then forced the name out louder. Mason. She saw him near the remains of the fireplace, half covered by drywall and shattered furniture. He lay on his side, one arm bent wrong under his body, face a face streaked with soot. He was not moving. Megan's heart seized. She crawled to him, knees screaming, hands shaking. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, searching for the carotid pulse the way she had 1,000 times in the ER. Nothing at first. Then beneath her fingertips a thrum. Strong, rhythmic. Megan's throat closed. She did not realize she was crying until warm liquid cut paths through the ash on her cheeks. Mason groaned. His eyelids fluttered. His eyes opened unfocused, then sharpened slowly steel gray, returning through the haze. He tried to speak. His lips moved, but only breath came out. Megan leaned close. "Do not," she whispered. "Save it." Mason's mouth twitched the faintest hint of something like humor. His voice came out broken. "Did we," he coughed, "win?" Before Megan could answer, a boot stepped into her field of view and gently pressed down on the pistol lying in the dust near her hand. Megan's fingers tensed instinct, screaming. She looked up. General Robert Reeve stood in the doorway, framed by shattered wood and moonlight. His uniform was torn and smeared with mud. His cane was gone. He looked like a man who had moved through darkness and violence and returned with his rage intact. Behind him, operators flowed in rifles up, scanning, then moving outside again. Megan saw shadows in the yard, bodies being dragged, hand zip-tied men in black gear forced to their knees. General Reeves' eyes dropped to Megan, then to Mason. His face tightened, then loosened slightly as he saw Mason's eyes open. "Easy," the general said, voice low and unusually gentle. "It is clear." Megan tried to sit back, but her body trembled. The adrenaline was draining, leaving behind a heavy exhaustion that felt like it had settled into her bones. They knew Megan whispered, staring at the destroyed walls. They knew exactly where we were. General Reeve crouched, checking Mason's pupils with a practiced motion that suggested he had done it more than once in other places. "We know," he replied. Mason tried to push himself up, his face contorted with pain. Megan put a hand on his shoulder, holding him down. "Do not move," she said. Mason's jaw clenched, but he listened. General Reeve stood again and looked out through the broken wall into the night. The wind cut through the cabin, now cold and sharp. The smell of smoke mixed with damp pine. An operator stepped in and handed the general a small device, dark and rectangular with wires and a cracked screen. "Comms gear," the operator said. They were coordinating. We also pulled a tracker off their lead man. General Reeves' eyes narrowed as he examined it. His jaw flexed once hard. Megan watched him, chest tight, still tasting dust. "How did they find us so fast?" she asked. General Reeve looked at her, then at the crushed remains of the medical bag in the corner where supplies had scattered. He did not blame her. His expression held only the cold focus of a man mapping a problem. "We recovered enough to trace where the information came from," he said. Mason's eyes sharpened despite his pain. "The leak," he rasped. General Reeve nodded once. "Yes." Megan stared at the wreckage of her childhood cabin, the place her father had used to pretend the world could not reach him. The world had reached it anyway, with rifles and explosives and men who moved like professionals. Her hands began to shake again, not from fear now, but from the delayed realization of what she had just done. She had fired a weapon. She had watched a man fall. She had felt Mason's body cover hers as the grenade detonated. She had crawled through splintered wood and found his pulse with her fingers. The skills she had learned under fluorescent lights had not been enough. Not alone. She had become something else in the span of one night and one long day. General Reeve stepped closer. "We are moving," he said. Megan nodded, even though she did not know what moving meant now. She pushed herself to her feet, wincing as bruised ribs protested. She bent to Mason, slipping her arm under his shoulders carefully. Mason's breath caught as she lifted him. He gritted his teeth but did not make a sound. "Easy," Megan said, voice low. "I have you." Mason's eyes met hers. The steel was still there, but beneath it was something quieter. Trust earned in blood and smoke. Outside, operators secured the last of the attackers. The valley was dark again, but the night no longer felt empty. It felt watched. It felt crowded with unseen connections. As Megan helped Mason toward the doorframe where the cabin used to have a wall, General Reeve stood with the comms device in his hand, eyes fixed on the tree line as if he could see all the way back to the person who had opened the door for the enemy. His voice was calm when he spoke again, and that calm was the most dangerous sound Megan had heard all night. "We are fixing this." The convoy did not return to the cabin. They left it behind like a shed skin, smoking timber, and splintered boards scattered across the ridge. Operators moved with quiet urgency, checking bodies, pulling weapons, photographing tattoos, and gear-bagging radios and cell phones that never rang. Megan stayed close to Mason as they loaded him into the back of an SUV, patting him with blankets and pressure dressings, her hands steady, even as her ribs ached with every breath. General Robert Reeve stood in the mud with the captured comms device in his hand, staring into its cracked screen as if it were a window into the person who had signed Mason's death warrant. When he spoke, his voice stayed calm, the kind of calm that came from a place deeper than anger. "Get the evidence secured," he said. "Get the prisoners separated. No talking between them." An operator nodded and moved off. Another approached with a sealed bag containing the small recorder recovered from the assassin's gear, the same one that had been tossed into a case during the chaos. Megan saw it and felt the cold knot return to her stomach. A voice lived inside that device. A voice she already knew. They drove through the mountains in darkness, headlights cutting fog tires hissing on wet pavement. Megan sat beside Mason in the back seat, one hand braced on his shoulder to keep him steady over bumps. He drifted in and out of sleep, jaw clenched, breathing shallow. Every time his eyelids fluttered, his gaze found her first, as if verifying she was still there. "You good?" he rasped once. Megan checked his pulse with 2 fingers and kept her voice flat. "I am functional." Mason's mouth twitched. "That is your version of fine." Megan looked out the window at trees sliding past like ghosts. "Do not make me laugh," she said. "My ribs are filing a complaint." Mason exhaled a small sound that might have been amusement. Then his eyes closed again. They stopped at a secure site before dawn. Not a hospital, not a base with a sign, but a place that felt temporary and controlled. Lights were low. Doors were guarded. A medic with quiet hands helped Megan move Mason onto a cot. Megan watched the medic's technique and approved without saying it. The 4th line went in smooth. Warm fluids ran. Oxygen was adjusted. Mason's color improved by degrees. Megan stayed at his side anyway. In the hours that followed, time became a sequence of tasks. Mason slept. Megan checked vitals and rewrapped bandages. Operators came and went with clipped updates that sounded like pieces of a puzzle being forced into place. Prisoners talked when they thought nobody listened. Phones were copied. Radios were cracked open frequencies, traced messages translated into meaning. A name surfaced more than once in the recorded chatter. Pierce. Megan heard it from the doorway when an operator spoke to the general. She felt heat rise in her chest, sharp and unclean. General Reeve did not react outwardly. He listened, asked a question, then gave a command. The operator left boots quiet on the floor. Megan stared down at Mason's sleeping face and thought of the ER of fluorescent light of Pierce's cologne cutting through antiseptic. She remembered the way Pierce had looked at a dying man like he was an invoice. A day passed, then another. When Mason woke again, he looked less like a man pulled from an alley and more like himself, whatever that meant beneath the injuries. His eyes were clearer. His voice carried more strength even when it rasped. "My father," he said, glancing toward the doorway. "He is loud when he is quiet." Megan gave a tired nod. "I noticed." Mason shifted, wincing. "He does not trust hospitals." Megan adjusted his pillow. "Neither do I," she replied. Mason watched her face. "You are different now." Megan's hands paused. She kept her gaze on the IV line so she did not have to meet his eyes. "I am tired," she said. Mason's voice stayed steady. "You stood up, you shot, you held the line." Megan swallowed. The words made her throat tight in a way she did not like. "I did what was in front of me," she said. Mason's fingers moved under the blanket until they found her wrist. He did not grip hard. He just touched a quiet contact that felt like an anchor. "You are still you," he said. Megan looked at him then, and for a second the room felt smaller, quieter. She nodded once and went back to checking his vitals as if the numbers were safer than emotion. On the morning of the 3rd day, General Reeve entered with 2 men in plain clothes, federal posture, calm eyes, jackets that did not need to announce authority. One of them carried a slim folder. The other carried a sealed evidence bag. Megan recognized the shape inside the bag before it was set on the table. The recorder. General Reeve's gaze went to Megan. "We are going back," he said. Megan felt her stomach drop. "To the hospital?" she asked. "Yes," the general replied. "Pierce is speaking to the media." Megan's pulse jumped. "About me?" The agent with the folder nodded once. "He is controlling the narrative. He is also lying." Megan's hands clenched around the edge of the cot. She looked at Mason. Mason's eyes had turned cold again. "Let him," he said. General Reeve's expression did not change. "We are walking in," he said, on camera. Megan's mouth went dry. "My license," she began. The agent opened the folder and slid a document toward her. The board reviewed emergency action and new evidence, he said. Your license is active. Megan stared at the paper, her name printed cleanly. The word active stamped in the margin. The relief was not loud. It came as a quiet collapse inside her chest, like a fist unclenching. Mason watched her reaction and nodded once, satisfied. They dressed Mason in his dress blues metal set with a precision that made Megan's nurse brain recognize ritual. The uniform made him look like a different person than the man in the bed behind a curtain. It made his shoulders broader, his posture straighter, even with the cane in his hand and the sling supporting his arm. Megan put on a simple blazer and jeans borrowed from someone who had thought to pack civilian clothing. She pulled her hair back and covered the bruises as best she could, though one faint mark on her cheek still showed when she turned toward the light. General Reeve wore his dress uniform, too. Kane returned to his hand expression carved from stone. The drive to Sandhills Regional was quiet. No sirens, no flashing lights, just vehicles moving with purpose. When they arrived, the hospital atrium looked like a stage built for disaster. News vans lined the curb satellite dishes angled toward the entrance. Reporters clustered behind temporary barriers, microphones ready. Inside, a podium had been set up in front of the donor wall, glossy plaques reflecting camera flashes. The air smelled like polished stone and nervous sweat. Dr. Clayton Pierce stood at the podium in a crisp suit beneath his white coat hair, perfect face composed into solemn concern. Megan watched him from behind the glass doors and felt the old anger rise hot and familiar. He looked like a man who believed he could talk his way out of blood. Pierce leaned into the microphones. "Thank you for coming," he said smoothly. "This has been a harrowing week for our Sandhills family." Megan stepped forward a fraction, but General Reeve's presence beside her kept her still held in place by discipline and timing. Pierce continued, voice practiced. "We pride ourselves on patient safety, but sometimes danger comes from within." He paused, letting the cameras drink the phrase. Nurse Megan Hart was terminated for theft and insubordination. Shortly after, she abducted a critical patient from our care. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Pierce's eyes stayed sad, his tone heavy with fabricated regret. "We noticed erratic behavior, emotional instability. We took appropriate action. But she escalated." Megan's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her nails pressed into her palms. A reporter raised a hand. "Doctor, are you saying she is responsible for the patient's condition?" the reporter asked. Pierce nodded slowly as if pained by truth. "I am saying she is a danger," he replied, "and I blame myself for not acting sooner." The cameras flashed. Pierce held his posture like a man receiving an award. Then a voice carried from the back of the atrium, deep and steady. "I have one question." Heads turned, cameras swung. The entrance doors slid open. Captain Mason Reeve walked in. He moved slowly, cane tapping stone, but every step carried weight. His medals caught the light. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed forward. To his right walked General Robert Reeve. To his left walked Megan. The room did not just quiet, it stopped. Pierce's face drained of color. His hands tightened on the edges of the podium. "Security," Pierce hissed, voice cracking. "Security, arrest that woman." 2 hospital security guards stepped forward, uncertain. Megan saw Tom among them, and he froze, eyes wide. General Reeve's voice rose a command that did not require volume to dominate. "Stand down," he said. The guards stopped where they were. One lowered his hands. The other glanced toward Tom, then backed away. Mason continued toward the podium. Reporters parted instinctively, sensing a story bigger than the one they had been fed. Pierce tried to smile, tried to reclaim the room. "Captain Reeve," he said, voice thin, "I am relieved you are alive. We were deeply concerned." Mason reached the steps and climbed them with measured care. He stood beside Pierce, taller even with the cane, his presence turning the podium into something else entirely. He leaned into the microphone. "Dr. Pierce claims I was kidnapped," Mason said. His voice was calm, and that calm carried a lethal steadiness. I was not. Pierce's mouth opened. "You are confused," he began. "You were septic. You were delirious." Mason did not look at him. He looked out at the cameras. "Nurse Hart is the only reason I'm breathing," he said. A ripple moved through the crowd. Mason turned his head, then eyes locking on Pierce. "He did not just fire her," Mason continued. "He tried to get rid of me." Pierce's face contorted. "That is a lie," he spat. "He is still recovering. He does not know what he is saying." Mason reached into his pocket with his good hand and pulled out a small digital recorder inside an evidence bag. An agent stepped closer, verifying seal, then nodded. Mason held it up for cameras. "We recovered this from the man who entered my room disguised as staff," he said. Pierce's throat bobbed. "Deepfake," he blurted. "Anyone can fake audio." Mason pressed a button. Static hissed through the atrium speakers, then Pierce's voice came out clear as a scalpel. "The nurse is a problem," the recorded voice said. "She knows about the exposure. If Reeves survives, the payout is gone. Kill him. Kill her. Make it look like a robbery." A pause. Then the same voice again, colder. $2 million to the Cayman account by morning." The atrium fell into a silence that felt like oxygen had been removed. Pierce stumbled backward. His hands flew up as if he could push the sound away. "That is not me," he shouted. "That is fabricated." Megan stepped forward and looked him in the eye. She spoke into a microphone without needing to raise her voice. "You violated the oath," she said. "You treated a life like a transaction." Pierce's eyes flicked to the cameras, desperate, then to the security guards as if they could save him. None moved. General Reeve nodded once toward the federal agents. "Take him," he said. The agents surged forward. They grabbed Pierce by the arms, turned him, and pressed him against the podium he had been using as a shield. Handcuffs clicked. Pierce's face twisted between rage and panic. "You cannot," he shouted. "I have attorneys. I have donors. This hospital needs me." One agent tightened the cuffs and spoke quietly into Pierce's ear. Pierce's shoulders sagged a fraction. As Pierce was dragged away, his shoes skidding on polished stone, reporters shouted questions he could not answer. Cameras followed. The donor wall reflected the chaos back at itself, bright and merciless. Megan stood still. Her heartbeat sounded loud in her ears, like she was back in a trauma bay, listening for a rhythm to return. Tom stood near the edge of the crowd. When Megan's eyes met his, he lifted a hand in a hesitant salute, like a man trying to repair something without knowing how. Megan gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness, not condemnation, just recognition. Mason leaned slightly on his cane, the effort catching up to him. Megan stepped closer, her hand steadying his elbow. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Mason's eyes stayed on Pierce being pulled through the crowd. "I am alive," he replied. Then he looked at Megan. "Are you—" Megan inhaled. The air smelled like camera flash heat and disinfectant drifting from nearby corridors. This was her world, and now it felt like someone else's. "I think I am officially unemployed," she said, voice dry. Mason's mouth curved faintly. "Not exactly," he said. "Your license is active. There is a commendation pending." Megan stared at him. "A commendation," she repeated. Mason nodded once. "My father does not do thank you cards." General Reeve stepped closer, his gaze scanning the crowd, the exits, the angles. He spoke to an agent quietly, then turned back to Megan. "This hospital is finished for you," he said. Megan's throat tightened. "It already is," she replied. Mason shifted, pain flashing behind his eyes. He pushed through it and faced her fully. "I have an offer," he said. Megan blinked. "From you?" "From us," Mason answered. "A liaison role. Medical support integration. Someone who can think under pressure and does not fold when a doctor with a title starts throwing weight." Megan's mouth almost twitched. "You mean someone who argues with authority?" Mason's gaze held hers. "Someone who refuses to look away." Megan looked at the hospital atrium, at the nurses watching from the edges, at the doctors standing stiff, uncertain of what they had just witnessed. She thought of the basement, the code blue, the assassin's dead eyes. Then she looked back at Mason. "Does it pay better than this place?" she asked. Mason's smile came a little more real this time. "Yes," he said. Megan exhaled the sound quiet. "Then I accept," she replied. Mason leaned closer, voice low enough that cameras could not steal it. "You still want to drive a helicopter," he said. Megan's eyes narrowed. I did not say that she lied. Mason's smile widened, then softened, as he shifted his weight, the cane tapping once. Megan tightened her grip on his elbow, steady and practiced. Together they turned away from the podium, away from the donor wall, away from the building that had fired her, and then watched her return under the protection of a man it had tried to discard. They walked toward the doors as the reporters shouted behind them, voices fading into a background hum, and the bright afternoon light outside spilled across the floor like something clean.